Season 1 of My Adventures with Superman had everything a fan could have wanted from the series. Varying villains from the comics, Easter eggs, and even a hot Lois Lane. But I felt the show lacked in too many aspects for me to consider it likable. The most obvious problem was the number of plot holes I could find in each episode. I live for a well-crafted story, so seeing them put little to no thought in the narrative of these episodes really let me down. Though Season 2 has not been perfect, it has done something that I had never expected. It has, by all accounts, redeemed the story. But before I go into detail, let's have a short recap of my review of Season 1. Though the art direction for the series was well executed, they lacked a good understanding of how they wanted the story to properly progress. Many reasonable conclusions had to be sidelined in order to further the core narrative. This resulted in an overall annoying experience. For example, without going too in-depth with it, Clark was breaking everything in the first episode like he didn't know how to control his powers even though he had them for several years. Another question I had was, why did the Hollow Daddy randomly speak English the moment Clark left, but not while he was there? Why was his Hollow Daddy on that random ship that went berserk in the final episode? Why did Lois and Clark have the "you betrayed me" scene in the first episode when they barely knew each other up to that point? It's as though they had an idea of what they wanted to accomplish each episode and wrote around that idea, rather than creating a world and having it naturally unravel through realistic cause and effect. If you want my full opinion, you can check out my 2 reviews of Season 1. Without further ado, let's go over my thoughts on Season 2, episode by episode. Episode 1 is all about Clark having nightmares with his father playing a big part in them. We get the reminder that Jimmy is rich, and the moment I see the money over his head, I instantly knew he was going to be broke by the end of this season. They travel to Antarctica. Clark loses Lois and Jimmy and has another talk with his father. Lois and Jimmy almost dies twice by the robots magically having stormtrooper aim, and the bad guys are apparently blind. They meet up with Clark, they stop the kryptonite from destroying the ship, and kick the bad guys off of the ship. His Hollow Daddy dies, and we are left with the next narrative thread to keep the story moving. Find the communication beacon, find Lois's father, and find Clark's cousin, Kara. Alright, I already said some of the bad in this episode during my explanation, so let's finish that out. Why was the kryptonite in the ship? Also, why did it start to kill Hollow Daddy whenever they go there and not years earlier? Why was Hollow Daddy on that ship too? And that's all of them. The goods are a few, but noticeable. They explain why the father could speak English sporadically. They introduced one of my favorite DC characters, Supergirl. The father saying goodbye was also done extremely well to the point that it actually surprised me. I also like the music they use to show the alien technology, or when Clark goes Super Saiyan in episode 6. As we move into episode 2, keep in mind that this narrative string they keep chasing. We start with a kid asking Lois and Clark to ask Superman to save his dad. They travel to Task Force X's secret base, save Lois's father, and find out Amanda Waller has been experimenting on criminals and normal civilians. Superman then finds the beacon that will lead him to Kara, and they all leave on a yacht purchased by Jimmy. We then get the reveal that Alex from Season 1 is actually Lex Luthor. We also have a fun interaction with Clark being forced to live with Lois's father, the person who hates Superman with a passion. Alright, the bad. We get the cliche of Clark being interrupted every time he tries to tell Lois about Kara. The key that almost ended the world is just, vibing out in the open for anybody to snatch. Lois and Clark instantly find the kid's dad. If it was going to be that easy, then why even introduce him to the story? Let's move over to the goods, which have overtaken the bads already. Lois not wanting Supergirl to come is a completely reasonable and justified opinion. It adds a good tension between the two of them. Lois's dad staying with Clark is a fun idea I'm happy they decided to explore. The intro with Amanda Waller was just the right amount of goofy. Lex's reveal was done perfectly. Lex Luthor's reveal also shows that they are capable of having stories play out in the background of the series without having impactful moments from said narratives whimpering out. The build-up of Amanda Waller's ruthlessness throughout this episode truly shows how dangerous she is. Episode 3 is one of the weakest ones they've done. It doesn't progress the story further, but rather sets up more for future episodes to explore. The episode is a good representation of what Season 1 was like. I feel so little about this episode, I'll just give you the immediate highlights rather than a recap. We have Livewire's reintroduction, which is done almost perfectly. I just felt it was a little strange Superman didn't see her standing in the shadows, but I can let that slide. We then have a tech giant introduced, which will become the basis of LexCorp in the future. We also have tension building between Lois's father and Clark. We also have another string added to their relationship, Lois receiving an invite to work with Vicky Vale. What I hated about this episode was the cartoonishly evil CEO. We also have more robots with terrible aim. A funny line I heard during the climax said by John Irons. He said the energy from the giant bomb would harmlessly dissipate, which sounded very, very goofy. Irons picked up the hammer that only his suit was able to pick up, which also meant that they had to decrease the size of the hammer when he picked it up so it didn't look stupid. The stupid toy helicopter was actually useful, which is super dumb. They also now have Lois getting cut off when she tries telling Clark something important, which continues the annoying trope. The goods, on the other hand, is that Vicky Vale versus Lois contest they had. That was pretty good. I've stated this before, but the Livewire reintroduction was a pleasant surprise. Episode 4 has a lot of flaws, but it's still a strong episode regardless of these flaws. From here on out, I'll be giving a few sentences to summarize the story because of how dense my likes and dislikes for the next few episodes have become. The story follows two plots, one being Jimmy and Clark joining a science expo, and the other being Lois and her father running from Amanda Waller's men. We learn about Lois's past and her relationship with her father. Clark also learns that Jimmy was part of the reason why Lex became so powerful. This is something I skipped over, but back in episode 1, Jimmy gave Lex a pep talk, resulting in this spiral into power. The pep talk resulted in Lex joining Amanda Waller and becoming extremely influential in Superman hate propaganda, this being the reason that Clark and Jimmy's relationship crumbles, which I feel like is a bit of a stretch. I mean, it's not like he told Lex to do those things, but I'll allow it. Now for some of the bad. Jimmy not knowing the topic of the TED Talk he was speaking at is pretty unlikely. Lois keeps wanting her father to stay, but provides zero way for him to avoid dying to Task Force X. You have to also remember her father doesn't know Clark is Superman, so her argument really is just, trust me and stay. Another failure in the writing is Superman hearing Lois say he's different, but not the part 2 seconds after. You know, the part of her saying she loves him? It's also weird that Clark knows how to activate and use the beacon immediately. It would have been nice if it showed him not knowing how it functioned at first, or have his father show him how it works before he died. The goods for this episode really carry it through all of its faults. The father having a low-tech phone so he can't be tracked is a nice detail. Lois's backstory was also nicely done. I really enjoyed the progression of her character throughout the ages. It really shows why she came to hate her dad in season 1. The transition between her past to the present was also a beautiful transition. I enjoyed Clark taking pictures for a Superman fan, it got a chuckle out of me. Lex actually had some based and red-pilled opinions. He's kinda spitting straight facts. The fight where Superman paired up with Lois's father was pretty cool and fun. Now we're jumping over to another low-tier episode only carried because of the ending quarter. Episode 5 follows two plots. One is Jimmy exploring the city with Kara, and the other is Lois, Clark, and a reporter I don't care enough to learn their name joining a bachelor contest. Some of the scenes with Kara and Jimmy were fun, but some also left me with obvious questions. For example, why didn't she use her super strength or super speed when she got to Earth? She was instead hiding her abilities for no reason. If we had a reason for her hiding her abilities when Jimmy meets her, then it would have made more sense for the episode. The most annoying thing about this episode is that the reporter working with Lois pretends to know about their relationship, but it's always a bait and switch. At this point, it's not funny. It's grating. My final critique is that every fight Clark finds himself in, Jimmy and Lois has to be there. The last place I want them to be if I was Clark is between me and Kara, yet they always try to join the fight, as if they have a death wish. I do enjoy the growing tension between Superman and some of the public. It shows Lex Luthor's ideology rippling through the community, giving weight behind previous episodes. Another cool aspect is the reveal that Kara was the bad guy all along. If the reveal wasn't so obvious. What does lean towards an interesting progression in the story is the conclusion of the episode, Kara taking Clark away, which leads us into the best episode of Season 2. Episode 6 revolves entirely around Clark and Kara. The episode starts with Kara and Clark talking with each other in space. They head over to a civilization Kara thought was vibrant with life, only to find out everybody was snuffed out. They then meet Brainiac, a villain with weight behind him, someone who exudes evil with every scene he's in. We then finish the episode with Kara learning the truth. This episode is the only episode I've ever reviewed for this series that has nothing wrong with it. The interactions between Clark and Kara, Brainiac's betrayal in the series, the fight between Clark and the images of past warriors, the red sun sapping away Superman's powers, Kara forcing past the mind control in order to see the mural, the end reveal with the spaceship setting up the next episode, all of it is done so perfectly. Yeah, there are a few things I would change, but they are so minute it would simply cast a shadow on an episode I believe deserving praise. Now, I have seen episode 7, but I'll be leaving this review as a mid-season review. We will save that episode for later, so subscribe to stay updated. Since we've gotten a recap on these episodes, let me break them down to the simplest of forms and provide only the most important details of each episode. These details pertain to the plot and show how each episode connects to one another. I'll explain the reasoning for this afterwards. Now that the episodes are broken down, it's clear to see which ones fall short while others excel. Take episode 3 as an example. Episode 3 has a small amount of new or interesting information given to the audience. All in all, the small portion of information given does not justify the episode's existence. If I were to summarize the episode as Lex has a big corporation he stole from John Irons, Lois was offered a job by Vicky Vale, but she has to move, and Superman got shield powers, you could completely skip episode 3 altogether. It doesn't have enough to justify its existence, feeling more like a filler episode than a continuation of the story. This is a similar problem episode 5 suffers from. I could cut episode 5 into a 5-minute preview and convey the same amount of information in a fourth of the time. Episode 1 is a little light but can justify itself because it's the first episode of the season. It also had a really powerful ending. The problem with season 1 was its lack of a good narrative which carried the story. The episode spent time introducing more pawns to the puzzle but never spending time on having a solid narrative involving those characters. Most of the episodes were filled with plot holes while the season's main story played occasionally in the background. The difference between season 1 and season 2 is the purpose each episode prioritizes in their respected seasons. Season 1 spent more time introducing characters than building on a solid narrative, while Season 2 spent time taking those characters and building up a solid story. I will admit, Season 2 couldn't have existed if Season 1 didn't spend so much time introducing multiple characters. On the other hand, they chose to introduce that many characters in such a small season. If they decreased the number of characters by half, focusing only on the most important involved in the story, then they could have had more time to focus on the overarching story as well as each episode's individual story. But this video isn't about Season 1. Season 2 takes the build up from Season 1 and improves it in every regard. Each episode has an overarching continuation to the story. Even the weakest episodes in the season still continues the story and builds on it further. Though these weak episodes are still a continuation of the overarching story, the reason that they are weak is because the story that they are telling in their individual episode is weak and plays a small part in the overarching story. Though I cannot say everything the story has crafted this season is perfect, Season 2 is a whole different beast in comparison. Its focus on the overarching story tied a string to each episode. With each episode, this string compounded into itself a more and more interesting story. The reason episode 6 is so good lies not only because of its own success, but because it was built upon for the last 15 episodes. I do not know what the final half of the season will bring us, but for the first time since the release of Season 1, I'm excited to see what happens next. Now, thank you guys for coming and watching. Like, comment, subscribe, and as always, Johnny.